Hi, everyone. I'm Ken Mocabee. I'm senior partner at Parux, and this is my partner, Cesar Keller, and he's our CEO. And we're going to talk today about cost estimates and timelines. And this is one of those topics that's maybe not the most sexy in the world, but it is the one that often bites startups and product teams in the behind. And we thought it was an important topic to cover, and we wanted to do it today. So, Cesar, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who we are and what we do?
Absolutely. So Parix, a digital product studio, we love building and designing things in a way that's going to be used for selling business for example, software as a service or marketplaces. This is not just technology and a business model and kind of usability built on the one, but it's in itself a business in a box. And when you have an idea of how to really transform technology into getting lots of users to leverage this service. A lot of people are excited about it, but it takes a village on how to build these things. It takes know-how, and you better make sure that you actually connect with the actual users to provide that value. If you don't have enough value, they're just not going to pay for it. So one of the reasons we started this webinar series with Ken is we've done a lot of research on studies out there on how much products can fail. Up to 95% of digital products put into the market fail. But
Amazing.
what do the 5% of product teams do to be successful? We're always pushing the envelope here at Parix. We're always learning how to do things better. But at the same time, we thought, hey, let's showcase some of our experiences, share some stories, highlight some of the successes and failures. And that way, other people outside of our world can learn a little bit and get more familiar with what it takes to build successful products.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about why we're doing this particular one. I think one of the questions that everybody's trying to answer when they're building a product, how much is it going to cost and how long is it going to take? It's one of the most difficult questions to ask and to answer. And the problem is that very many teams do not have the experience, the resources, the talent. They've never done this before, and so they're struggling a lot of times to get to figure out what the budget is. They may have a limited runway, and how do you best spend that money? And then if you do build it and the budget gets out of control, that can kill a product or kill a company entirely, especially if you're a startup. Startups very often is one product that they have. If the budget gets out of control and you're doing endless pivots and it turns into a nightmare, very often that kills not just the product but the company as well. So that's really what we're talking about today.
Yes, just highlighting some of that pain, right? We've talked about this before. These stakeholders come with a passion and energy. Let's get after it, right? Uh, but are you serious with the resources that it takes? I think one topic that we commonly discuss is um, you don't do these things based on how much money you have, because normally it's not enough. You don't do this with perceived timelines like I got to get to market by this time, although that is certainly important. You work it backwards. You're trying to really pinpoint what's the problem? How do we solve that problem? Is that problem worth solving? Let's go talk to the end users. Let's go talk to these customers. What would it take to give you enough value for us to pay you or for to get paid, sorry, to exchange this service? And then find out these are the building blocks that you really got to pull off. Because if you don't pull these off, it doesn't matter how much money and time you put into this. How much is it going to cost to build that? Well, that's an art and a science to figure that piece out, right? But you and I can, we normally hear, I have $100,000 in my pocket. I got to get this up and running in 3 months. Can you help me with almost no discovery, no validation, nothing? It's just intuition. It's just, let's get after it. And oh, by the way, why doesn't it cost what I have? Instead of going, who do you need on the team that really knows how to estimate that? Let them tell you how much it's going to cost, what it's going to take based on how many resources you can give or not give. And then that is your actual realistic plan. So it's almost like coming at it from opposite sides of the spectrum. And we're laughing here, right? But it's so true. You can't just run these things through excitement and passion. You have to have data. And if you're not serious about the discovery process to plan that, you can be in the world of hurt right from the very beginning. Um, So anyway, that's a part of it. And then we talk about, so if you're in that scenario, and we know a lot of people live in that scenario, what decisions do they make about, well, I only have this much money? They end up going to hiring, let's say, offshore teams that are cheaper just because they're cheaper. But there's a whole bunch of management that you got to account for. And if you're non-technical and you haven't been a part of the world of building these, you don't have the experience of all the little delicate details on how to manage these things, manage the right people to get those results. How many stories have you and I have heard of, Ken, where the
Dozens.
budget's blown, the project didn't even get to 80%, you hired this offshore team because they were supposed to be cheaper, but no one managed expectations, and now you are with zero budget, and any really good team that's going to come in and save you, they're all going, well, that product, you basically, there's nothing you can salvage from it. You got to throw it away and start over. You and I, that's a pretty depressing story, but you and I have heard it time and time and time again. Why? Because they didn't do the proper research, they didn't follow the steps, and they didn't understand here's the proper resources to start. So you're right, it's not a sexy topic for today, but building the associations between costs and timelines and estimates, I think it's a good conversation to have so people have a better idea of how to manage it all together.
Yeah, it really is important, and I think you hit on a couple of things that were really important about the offshore teams or any kind of a team where, and it's not always an offshore team. It could be, I kind of disparage Cousin Larry a little bit. Cousin Larry is the developer that, he says he can do it, and he works out of his garage and does it part time, and he spends maybe tens of thousands of dollars over a period of a year or two. We've seen projects that have lagged for multiple years trying to get them over the finish line. And that's really the danger of using any kind of a resource that is not really competent and really up to the task of the what you're trying to do. And that's a harder decision to make for a lot of non-technical founders, and we totally get that. That's why you need to have somebody on your side who is technical. But you mentioned, the offshore teams. Very often, people get their code back, and it kind of got done. Maybe it's missing a bunch of pieces. I had a story one time from somebody that I talked to, and they had a roadmap that they had developed, and they had the most important pieces that had to be done. And they worked for months and months and months, and when they delivered it, it didn't have the most critical stuff. So his product just completely stalled out. He had to go back and find money, which he was struggling to do. And a year later, he was still not able to restart development. And those are the stories we've heard dozens and dozens of times over the years. And it's really kind of heartbreaking to see founders in that position.
Yeah, I'll share a story that you and I have talked about, and that is one of my buddies had to have a website done, and it's it's not a for profit, it's just a club, but they want to make sure that they're as professional as can be. And when they were talking about having American teams or agencies kind of maintain or rebuild or upgrade this website, the bids that they were getting back were anywhere in this 40, 60, $70,000 range. And that's what really talented teams kind of they can get that kind of a commitment. However, it just wasn't in the budget. So his only option was to offshore, and he did interview a couple companies, and he tried to pick the best one. Here's the funny thing: those other agencies that would have charged a little bit more, they were all trying to get that website done in about, I'll say, somewhere around 60, 70 days or something like that. We're in, we're out, we know what we're doing, we know the specs. This is a simple project for us. It took, although he got it done, and then he was able to meet his budget, which was more on the 20,000 side. It took this team close to 9 months to get the website done. So what that tells me is, how can a company be profitable by working on a project for $20,000 for 9 months? You're talking about people that they're paying their people very, very little. It's just brute force, man force, trying to get the thing done. But it also means that the management and expectations of the talent and execution to make sure this is right, this is approved, this is right, this is approved, and just go through it quickly. My friend told me it was a nightmare going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And he was this close to pulling the pin. And he's like, I should have just paid The extra $20,000 is just that we didn't
Yeah.
have it. So even when you hire a team that's cheaper, that doesn't mean that that's the right solution, right? Because what if you have to pivot? We've talked about this. How many times do we have to be agile and pivot because we're finding through iteration and things? Do you want a team to be lagging months behind and then another set of months behind with a pivot? So you can't just go for the cheaper. You got to find that cross-functional team that actually has the talent and experience to guide you through this the right way. So that selection of the vendor really, really connects the dots with this problem of timeline estimates and cost, right? You got to have the right people telling you what to do. And if you don't, it can be a big miss.
Yeah, and that's there's another risk in that scenario in that let's say that it has taken a better part of a year to develop your product or your website or whatever. You get frustrated, you pull it back, and you say, "Oh, I do need a good team to do this, a competent team," and so you bring it back on shore, and then they look under the hood and it's a mess. And we've seen that many, many times. They maybe use frameworks and technical stacks that are outdated or even completely expired that no longer are being supported. But because the team had experience with that, they went ahead and built it with that stack. And the founder, the product team didn't have any idea until they got it back and got the code that it was really that kind of a nightmare. And then, what do you do? At that point, you're trying to figure out, do we refactor it? Do we rebuild it? Or do we try to, keep working with what we have? And that's just a really tough spot to be in. So finding the right team early on is critical. It's not easy to do, especially if you're a non-technical founder. We totally get that. But it is something that has to be thought through. And that lure of that inexpensive offshore rate is something it's the siren song for a lot of founders. Like, well, that'll get me over the finish line. It's half the price of what it might cost here in the States. And the reality is it can be very, very expensive and a very, very difficult decision when it goes poorly.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. What topics do you want to go through today and just kind of
Yeah.
expand and share with our audience?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, I don't want to go too deep in the woods on this whole discussion about waterfall versus agile, but we live in an agile development world without fixed budgets. And I know that this is one of the things that everybody's looking for, especially if you're a non-technical founder. You do have a limited amount of money. Like you said, I've got $100,000 to build something. How do I do that? The risk of getting somebody to give you a fixed bid, and it still happens out there. There are companies out there that will tell you they'll go ahead and build it for X amount of money. Cesar, talk a little bit about some of the risks associated with that approach.
I mean, here's the sad part, right? You and I have been a part of it for a long, long time. With the type of projects that we build, it is impossible, literally impossible, to talk about here's exactly what this is going to cost.
Mhm.
And we've mentioned it, right? There's iteration, there's back and forth, there's testing and validating, there's building prototypes. And as you go through all these actions, you start learning more and more and more, which refines how you get through these projects. So if you want a fixed bid, what people don't know is those companies are going to buffer that project. Basically, they don't know. They're just going to add hey, in order for us to take this project on and not be left high and dry, what's the maximum price that we can charge for this? That's the first thing that they do because it is impossible. And eventually you get to some big number. And what you're trying to basically do is you're trying to hedge a bet. Do we feel that we can get all those unknowns done and work out with the client to a certain extent without going over this budget, without us losing money? So number one, you're starting out the relationship kind of like on a lie, right? Second part about that lie is just because you've created that big budget, these companies are pretty smart, at least the ones that manage this stuff correctly. They have clauses in their contracts where they're going to do change orders, which means that every time you pivot, every time you make a major change, they're going to basically say that wasn't a part of the scope of work. And in order to do that, here's a new bid. Here's a new bid. Here is a new bid. Now, with that kind of arrangement where they are pre-buffering because they don't actually know, right? They're just taking an estimate, a guess. And then on top of that, They have rules of engagement that say, if you fall out of this box, we're going to charge you every single time. That can be extremely costly to manage. And that ends up costing companies way more than if you just go through the agile process and it's controlled with, financial kind of rules of engagement, if you will. And not only that, these companies, if they don't have integrity, they can build a whole bunch of features and functions and things that you don't actually need. So given those counterparts, wouldn't you rather start out with a company that's being honest with you and saying, well, we can't know everything, but let's go through a serious discovery process and unveil all the most important things on how to set you up for, this is most likely the bandwidth. This is most likely a window. We can actually start this process and learn through this process, and you will be billed based on our interactions and engagements. And we're always trying to prove ourselves worthy of value because we want this to work out and we truly have vested interest in this being successful. That's a different team with different rules compared to, okay, how much do we have to charge? What's the absolute maximum to where we're mitigating all the risk for us and we don't have to work hard at telling them how hard, how complex, and how detailed. All we want them to do is to sign the contract. Those
Yeah.
are two different kinds of engagements. And if I were a part of this world, knowing what I know, I would definitely want to trust the people that I'm working with and not start on false expectations.
Yeah, and I think that the other scenario that you see a lot is when you have a team that maybe is struggling a little bit uh, to find projects. They will underbid a project intentionally, knowing full well that the change orders will come later on down the line. So they may underbid it, lowball it in order to get the project, and then knowing that they can tack on whatever they want at the end, and now it becomes an adversarial relationship. If the startup is running out of money, then it becomes a real nightmare. Then you start cutting corners. You're doing things slapshod. You're not really going through good controls and processes. So the quality of the product suffers dramatically. And that's really an adversarial relationship as opposed to a partnership kind of relationship. And that's where a good team that's using Agile, they're always surfacing problems ahead of time. They're always saying, "Hey, what's the best way to do this? What's the quickest way? What's the best value?" They may bring items to the table that maybe they introduce technical debt, but it's done strategically as opposed to at the end when you're trying to stretch a budget and get something over the finish line. So that's the real dynamic that is so awful when a founder is in that situation and they can't get their team to really get them over the finish line with a quality product, and it's a real problem. We've seen it many times.
One insight that we share with a lot of conversations and prospects is how you and I both hate the term MVP. And it's because it's always misused in a way, right? If I break it down to its simplest form, MVP is really you're solving the root problem, you're providing value to the customer, and you have a short list of here's all the things that we need to do to ensure that that customer is taken care of, right? And if you start your plan based on that, and then you work that plan backwards of, okay, what is it going to cost to design, build that, validate that, and get that to market? That's what the cost should be, as opposed to how MVP is treated, which is, hey, Ken, I have $100,000 and I have 6 months. What can you build for me? And let's determine what the MVP is based on those constraints. Well, guess what? You're no longer delivering an MVP. You're delivering what you could afford, which most times falls way short of what the customer needs to define the right value for them to pay you for X service that you're creating. What kind of expectation do you set if you are the type of business that knows this and you still take on the project, and then the client gets to that particular point of view and now they're like, well, I'm stuck because this is all I had and I told you this up front. Where was that character and integrity saying, well, that might not be enough, and oh, by the way, you don't build an MVP based on what you have. You build an MVP based on the data of what needs to be resolved for this to be a sustainable, viable business. So at the end of the day, you got to pay the piper. The question is, are you going to pay the piper and pay attention in the beginning? and work that into your plan? Or are you just going to be naive, put your blinders up, get to that, crossing of the bridge and get there and go, uh-oh, I'm out of time, I'm out of budget, what do I do now? And now you start to panic. Uh, it, it's a choice. And the people that are responsible and the project teams that succeed, the product teams that succeed, they take this very, very serious account of let's get the planning right in the beginning, or else we're just setting ourselves up for failure.
Yeah, that's those are great points. And I think, the purpose of the MVP really is to validate that you're solving the problem, that it has value. And so very often the MVP only covers those things that are innovative and the things that you brought to the table that uh, are, that have that unique value proposition. The problem is that when you do have to build out beyond the MVP, it gets very, very tricky because there's a lot of things maybe that you didn't figure out or think through when building that MVP that you now have to build in if you're going to get a scalable product that is ready for the market, ready to get, to validate product market fit, which is a different level. So MVP could be, it's minimal. That is the first word in the MVP. But when you're really ready to go to market with a product, it has to be polished. And there's a lot of things about from onboarding and any kind of other, forms and things that you have to do, data integration points, APIs, et cetera, gets to be very, very tricky when you think you have done a lot of those things up front when you really haven't. So those are some of the things that bite people in the behind. And I think maybe this is a good way to get into some of the hidden cost escalators that we see all the time. So we kind of talked a little bit about the unknowns and the things that will come up, and you have to do some pivots. I've got one story that happened to me, happened to our team. So we're developed a marketplace, and we're using one of the platforms, and we were well into the build. We had the design, we had a lot of the back end done, and I think we were using I can't remember which one it was. Shopify, I believe, is the one we were doing. The problem was is we got about halfway through the build, and I get a message from our engineer, and he said, "Hey, do you know they're using the same SKU, the unique customer number? They're reusing those SKUs for different products. Like, how is that even possible?" And so in our world, you have to have a unique product ID. Well, in this case, the unique product ID was not unique. And so we talked to the client and said, "Oh yeah, yeah, we had done our discovery, we'd done a deep dive on everything, and yet this was not disclosed." And it was a huge, huge pain point. He said, "We have to use the SKU because they had blended catalogs together, and it's a long story of how that all happened, but they stuck to their guns and they weren't able to change their SKUs." So wound up costing them a lot more time having to refactor because that was not something that's easily supported. So we had to create unique IDs, and we gave them a way to use those SKUs in a different way. But those are the stuff that, those are the kinds of things that really, you can't foresee. I mean, there was no way for us to see that unless the customer had to, disclose that during discovery. And only when we got the data and we're starting to build it that we ran into that problem.
I'll give some call outs from that. At least your team was qualified enough to go, okay, we know how to get around this problem. Sometimes people hire teams that, whether it's on the design side, whether it's on the analyst side, or whether it's on the engineering side, they don't have enough skills and talents to pull certain things off. And I think that's something that I wanted to call out from the estimate side, right? In order for you to give a proper estimate, you have to have the right people at the table. And not only that, we always say it takes a village. This is not individuals providing estimates, because the last thing you want to do is work in silos, right? You need a cross-functional team, and the entire team shows up. And yes, certain people have more influence and weighting on certain things, but you estimate as a team. That way, when there's like, well, I think this is easy. Well, I think this is going to be hard. At least you can have the conversation as to why, set the context, and then arrive at, you were correct. No, I was correct. No, the blending of this, here's the right estimate, right? Another thing is you want that estimate to be based on real life experience. So have you selected a team that has done these kinds of projects in the past? so that these teams that get together, they can correlate this with previous experiences and go, hey, remember when we built that one thing that was very similar to this? What were those numbers? What was that data? How did we get that? uh, there are so many different ways that you can estimate. There's actually various methodologies, and we're not going to get into the details of that today. I can see where we can deep dive into a whole topic of just estimating
Oh,
within agile teams, and I look forward to that conversation. But I'm just calling out the estimates themselves and how you pivot and how you deal with the scenario that you just mentioned is somewhat stipulated based on how cross-functional and how qualified your team is to do it. So even though the budget went up, at least you were to pull it off. But how many times do you get stuck with the team that, well, we're stuck then. The technology that we picked is all we can do. We can't really, if we change the technology or the stack now, there goes our budget. So we're totally stuck. What do you do with a team like that, right? So I love pinpointing and connecting the dots between the timeline, the estimate, and the cost, because there's so many factors that if one goes off, it has a ripple effect and everything blows up. That's why we kind of combine these three topics all in one for today's conversation.
no, that's important stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the WAG and how that's used in these contexts, um, and what its value is. I know there are times when somebody says, "Hey, I've only got $50,000," and they'll tell you about the project. You may even do a little brief on the project, and the WAG is not necessarily to. By the way, the WAG means wild ass guess, but with a competent team, it's really a scientific, kind of estimate that's based on our experience with projects similar in scale and scope. And again, it's not an estimate that you're supposed to hang your hat on. The goal of the WAG a lot of times is just say, are we in the right ballpark? Do we have anywhere near the right resources to pull this off? And if they don't, they either need to go back and find the right resources in terms of money or maybe other, team members or whatever that is, or they have to lower their expectations and say, okay, what can we do? Again, I know that you had talked about limiting the budget, but maybe you go through discovery. Maybe you do things that add value to your project, but you're not actually building the product. So you change what you're going to do. And by the way, you should be doing that user discovery and that market research anyway. So that may be a good place to spend your money, but you know full well that you're going to have the additional budget in order to build the actual product. But a lot of times we talk to people that, especially early stage founders, they're non-technical. They do have very, very limited budgets, and they want to know, are we just in the right ballpark? And I think, Cesar, could you talk a little bit about how we handle those kinds of situations and what the value of that is and what the risks are of that?
Sure. This is also known in our world as t-shirt sizes. If you go from extra small all the way to like extra large and all the t-shirt sizes in between, that's kind of like one way to think about this, right? Like, what's the size and complexity of this thing? And when we've built things of similar sizes and complexities, what is that ballpark feel? Are we at least pointing north that we're in the ball field? Let's highlight some high level factors. Even though it's a fun acronym, WAG, Wild Ass Gas, you're right. There is some actual procedure that goes in place. But let's talk about some of the principles of those. Number one, you got to have a cross functional team that has built the stuff involved. If you have people that are non technical or just the business owner or the stakeholder or the person that had the idea, that person's not qualified to provide said information. So number one, you got to get the right team in place, right? And guess what? It can't be like a guy. I've built X things. It gone are those days, right? It's got to be a cross-functional team. Number two, you have to document what I think is one of the most important things is risk. Because you can literally sit down and you can go through, here's all the things that we got to do at a high level. Well, each one of those things can have a risk story associated to it. Here, we know a lot of information. We've done a lot of research in this sector. Therefore, our risk is low. Over here, barely any research, no validation, don't know what technology is going to solve that. We have an idea of a workflow, has not been validated, risk is high. So if you just took the discipline to break things down into logical groupings and then associate risk to each one of these things so that both the partner or your production team and the stakeholders can come together and agree to the risk up front, that's a game changer. Because then you're not arguing about this thing 2 or 3 months later, like, wow, we went sideways, this got off track. And what?
Yeah.
Guess what, guys? We all rose our hand and we all talked about this is risky because we don't know XYZ. So what do we need to put in the roadmap to do the right research, to zero down, break down, break down, break down, break down until we can pinpoint where the risk is coming from. Okay. I think that is common sense, but not all teams do that. Another thing is confidence. Once you have identified the level of complexity, the level of skills and resources required to accomplish something, and you have provided enough risk scores, now you can talk about the confidence you have based on the estimate you're giving. So if we say our estimate is, and I know the estimates can be done in a variety of ways, whether story points, hours, whatever. The estimate to get this done is this much time, roughly this much cost window, and the confidence is high. That can only come from a qualified team that's done this before, a team that understands what needs to be done, and where risks are low. So you can almost use it as like a counterbalancing, right? We should have pretty good idea of what is going to be on target and what might be off target just by establishing risk and establishing confidence, right? More important than that, once you dig into details, you can have success criteria, which is high level, or you can have acceptance criteria, which is more detailed level. So as you start grouping all these, I'll call it tasks that you need to get done, and you have these tasks segmented, each set of tasks or grouping of tasks can have in order for this to succeed, here are the root parameters. This needs to happen, that needs to happen, this exclusion needs to take place. You write them all down. Now, with success criteria, it could be high level. Now, once you're down to a story level or more detailed tasks, that's where you have acceptance criteria, where you can say, this will not pass. This cannot get to production unless it's working this way, unless it gets this approval, unless it's just doing these specific things. That takes discipline and planning to do if you want to do these things. But what does it do? If you really nail these things down, your teams are no longer arguing about the quality of the product with passion.
Right.
They have passion and they're arguing for all the right reasons. But guess what? You're not arguing about. Is this done? You know it's not done if it did not pass all this criteria. A lot of teams that do it, they do great in the beginning. And as the project goes on and on and on, they have to have the discipline to keep it up. But Ken, how many teams don't even do these kinds of exercises? And they just shoot from the hip. Now you have that issue of this WAG that you have. It's not the same. All teams giving WAGs. Some WAGs are way better than others because these teams are trained appropriately on how to collaborate, how to have no silos, how to have transparency, and be honest with the customer.
Yeah, and that's really important. I've really come to value acceptance criteria as one of my most favorite exercises that we go through, because in so many times when you get through discovery and you start delivering product, the founder maybe or the product owner might say, "Hey, we missed a feature, we missed something big maybe," and well, it's not here in the discovery document. Well, I sent that email back in April, which may have been 6 months ago, and it didn't get included. The acceptance criteria really avoids that problem and avoids that kind of nightmare scenario where you're trying to refactor and deliver that that feature that needs to be shoehorned into the product at that point. So I've always I really love the way that gets everybody on the same page and makes it's a consensus of what we're going to build. So let's talk a little bit about the shiny object syndrome. And I know this is something that we work with, have to deal with a lot of times with founders that are very creative. They're very innovative. And so they're having shower thoughts in the middle of discussion and want to introduce new features and change things right in the middle of the build. Sometimes pivots are important, and you learn something new. You find out something as you go through the process, but to have that kind of shiny object scenario where there's a continual stream of new things that get introduced in the middle of the build. Let's talk a little bit about the risk of that and how to deal with that.
Yeah, there's methodologies that say this in different ways, but a simple way to put it is, are you really solid on the strategy of what are the needs, what are the wants, and what are the wows for a project? Obviously, the best of projects out there, the best of products out there have a good balance between all these. But when you're talking about hitting a product deadline and getting to market, you really can't be focused on the wows because you have certain needs that have to be met. And what good is it to have bells and whistles if the basics of the application don't work? I can't onboard, I get stuck. When I click this button, all the results don't show up the way that they should. Who cares about the other fancy features that you have? Because customers just need to get their work done, right? That breakdown, it's so easy to say, what are the needs? What are the wants? What are the wows?
Mm.
But if you haven't done your research right, if you're not involving customers, if you don't have the right team that can help you pick the right technology, the right stacks, the right way to do these things, that exercise alone can be very challenging. And not only that, it can waste a lot of time, energy, and resources if you're going down the wrong path. So identifying those and making sure you're disciplined and focused of we cannot do these things until the basics are right. What are the basics? You can't be guessing at this point. You have to have validated certain things. So yeah, you're going to have your onboarding right. And if your onboarding is not right, you're going to be messing up that you only have one chance to make a good impression. You just got me excited. I'm going to sign up for your product and then I can't get in or I can't get access or something fails. Again, that's that discipline and maturity that better teams, the 5% that are successful, they're really targeted like, let's make sure we get the basics right. And then let's start extending these things and let's have a horizon for the vision of where this product is going. The other thing I like to talk about is what good is it to have all these features if you don't have customers? Guess what? Features are designed for customers. And if you don't have any, you probably don't have the right focus on what features are actually required to drive value. So don't focus on the 100 features that you want over time. Focus on what are the 20 features that these people need the most to go through the process, have joy, and feel like you provided good value. Focus on that and then extend features that are more cool in the future. And that's a very difficult topic to slow a stakeholder down when he's excited about the complicated, bells and whistles of the application and whatnot. So again, it's just got to be in balance. But if you don't have the right team that can help you and focus on these are our anchors, let's focus here first. It's very easy to just be all over the place and chase those shiny objects for sure.
Yep, yep. And the opposite side of that, and it's really kind of the same sort of problem. It's a little bit different though in the way it's delivered, is the unrealistic roadmaps. We have potential customers sometimes that we've talked to that have unbelievably complex wish lists of features and functions, and with no understanding of the technology required to deliver them. And so you have situations where, well, let's slow down. How are you going to get that data? You want to deliver this feature, you're going to have data that's going to have to be connected. Where's that data going to come from? Well, we haven't figured that out yet. We'll figure that out as we go along. What if that data doesn't exist? Or what if you have to create data sources or cobble them together from different sources? Those can get extremely expensive very, very quickly. So we see that a lot of times. There was one founder that I talked to that he had over 30 branded features. Each feature was named with a full complex of, all the stuff that it was going to do with data and everything else. And it was like, how are you going to pull this off? There's just no way. Even if you had, let's say you had $100 million, you would still struggle to deliver all of those things in a timely manner in a way that delivered value to the customer. And so, you have to be realistic. You have to be able to say, okay, what can we do that's going to drive value, that's going to move the needle? And And that's something that's really hard sometimes when you have innovative founders that are very creative. And that's really why they got into this to begin with. They want to drive innovation. Well, just creating features and creating, and being inventive is not the same as innovation. And that's one of the things that we talk a lot about is that, innovation requires a different level of commitment to the process and to the customer than just creating new stuff. So yeah, those are some of the risks that I think that we have to guard against, and our clients have to guard against, product teams. And so we've gone pretty far here, Cesar. We've had this has been a really good discussion. How would you wrap this up?
I would say, hey, if you want to be in the top five of project teams that succeed, number one, have a plan. And it's not about here's my current budget and here's my timeline. It's reverse. It's what do I need to do to make sure 100% that I deliver value to the people that I'm trying to help? And what is that build going to take? And guess what? Everything that I've ever done in life, there's no shortcuts. If you really care about something, it's hard work, a lot of dedication, and paying attention to the details, right? So create that plan and then double check against your budget and your timeline and go, is the gap too big or can I make that gap up? But just the fact that you're having the level of maturity and discipline to think about it that way, that puts you in that top 5%, as opposed to just intuition. I'll figure it out later. Yes, you will always figure stuff out later, but you have to have a realistic plan. Number two, you got to make sure that you're very selective of the team that you choose to work with. Do they have the right skills? Do they have the right talents? Have they done these kinds of things before? Can they pull some knowledge from other experiences and other builds that's going to help lift you up and help make strategic pivots as you go along? They don't overplan. They don't underplan. It's the Goldilocks syndrome. Those teams are hard to find. So how about this? Have a really, really careful selection process as to the people you choose to work with, as opposed to just hiring the team that, oh my God, they said that they can do this and it's underneath the budget that I have. I'm going to select the cheapest team. That is a critical decision. And then as you create these plans, what are the anchors that you're going to set to make sure that you're holding yourself true to getting to your vision? Meaning, okay, we set this plan up, but what is my confidence? What is my risk? What are my success criteria? What's my acceptance criteria? And can you be disciplined to be reviewing those, not just one and done? Can you do that over time to make sure that there's no silos and you have full transparency from stakeholders to production people to your customers? Having that level of maturity when you're planning these things out, that's going to give you better numbers when it comes to cost, timelines, and estimates. So yeah, not the sexiest topic, just like you said, really, really important insights. And hopefully by sharing some of these things out there, people make better decisions or reach out to us and get some help.
That's awesome. Cesar, thank you very much. This was a really fun topic. We could probably go on this all day, but I think this is a good place to stick a pin in it. And I think we're going to revisit some of these topics in the near future.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. And until the next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.